Hey, Sub2ers, welcome to this episode of the Sub2Deals Show. Today we're talking about short-term rentals, and maybe not short-term rentals like most of what you hear about them. In fact, most of those things I wouldn't touch. But we're going to have a fella on here today that has a lot more common sense approach to them, and I think it'll help you make a lot more money with some of your Sub2 deals. So we'll be back in just a second. Hey, deed grabbers, welcome to this episode of the Sub2Deals Show, where we talk about all things subject to. Now, occasionally we may talk about other real estate investing topics, but it's always something to help you with your real estate investing business. Now, if you're listening to our podcast on Apple or one of those other podcast mediums, we'd like to invite you to jump over to our YouTube channel where you can watch our pretty faces while we're talking and not just listen to us. And you can find our YouTube channel at sub2tv.com. Also, if you want to learn how to do Sub2, in addition to watching our YouTube channel, you can check us out at Sub2 University. We've got just about every program on there you would ever want about Subject to, creative finance, anything from how to build your own business plan, negotiate with sellers, and our Sub2 coaching. Which we've got probably one of the least expensive coaching programs on the planet with our $7 coaching. You go to $7coaching.com and I'll teach you how to buy Sub2, sell with seller finance for $7 a month. If you find a better deal than that on coaching, let me know about it because I want to join that group. Guys, today we're going to talk about short-term rentals. And you have heard me talk about this several times. I think the way most people do it is really dangerous. In fact, we're going to talk about some of those things today. But we've got a guy that does things a little bit differently. And I'm going to bring him in and let him talk to you guys. Kirby Atwell, welcome to Sub2Deals Show.
William, it's an honor to be here today, joining you from Costa Rica, where it's about 100 degrees warmer than it is back home in Indiana right now. So happy to join you.
Woo, man, we're glad to have you. I'm going to tell you something. We're in Arkansas, but you'd never know it. If I opened those curtains behind me, you'd see about 4 inches of ice and snow on the ground. It's about 18 degrees here right now. So who would know it's Arkansas?
Wow,
it is.
yeah, no kidding.
Right. So this Kirby Atwell with Living Off Rentals. Kirby and I have talked several times about Sub2s and using those with short-term rentals. But before we get going, Kirby, tell everybody about yourself and why you're an expert on short-term rentals.
Yeah, so I'm happy to go through my story of getting started. I'll kind of compress it a little bit, but I have a military background. I went to West Point Military Academy, and then when I got out, or when I was stationed at my first duty station down in El Paso, picked up the gateway drug in the real estate investing, I call it, which is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and read that book. And I just fell in love with the concepts. And I knew this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life in some capacity. And so not knowing what I didn't know, I bought a few rentals while I was in the Army, but then I got out. And I thought the way to make money in real estate is to flip houses. You buy something cheap, fix it up, sell it for a whole bunch more. All the flipping shows were really taking off. And so that just seemed like the way to do it. So I partnered with some friends. We ended up flipping about 70 properties throughout the Chicagoland area. And it started off okay. And kind of got worse from there in terms of the profit. We kind of just created a giant treadmill for ourselves that we could never really get ahead on. And we thought that the key to success was going to be growth. So we thought, well, we just need to be in more markets, we need to be doing bigger deals, better deals, more deals. And I think that's the mentality a lot of people have getting into this. And they think that means success. It's like growth is synonymous with success in some way. And what we realized real quickly is it's real tough to scale flipping. There's not a whole lot of flipping companies out there that are scaled really, or have done it well anyway. And so it just had a lot of challenges with that. And so I realized after 5 years of doing that cash flowing properties were going to be the future. That was going to get me to the goal that I set out for when I first read Rich Dad Poor Dad, what interested me in it. And that was financial freedom. And so started with long-term rentals, but realized real quick that cash flow was going to take a long time to get to a place of financial freedom, where it was replacing my income. I mean, they're good for a long-term retirement, but I was going to need a lot of them to get to financial freedom. So then we moved from Chicago to Indiana, Northwest Indiana, where we live now. And we were buying a property that we were rehabbing right on Lake Michigan. And we thought, you know what, there's this unfinished walkout basement that's not being used for anything. And we're rehabbing this house anyway. Why don't we just try a short-term rental in the basement and see what happens? And so I kept hearing about Airbnbs, and this is back in 2017. And so we did it, and we finished it just before Memorial Day weekend. And so we put it on Airbnb right before the summer, and we booked up the whole summer back to back to back. And we made over $20,000 that first summer. And it was kind of just on a whim that we just were like, let's just try it out. And there was entire rental houses that I had that weren't making, $22,000 in the whole year. And we were making that just in that first summer. So we, sorry, there's an iguana running across the roof.
That's funny. I lived in Belize for several years, and I tell my wife all the time, you can just be hanging out on the beach and a big iguana just come scurrying by, and she's like, we're never going.
It's wild. It's wild. So anyway, so we kind of got hooked, and we were like, okay, if this works this well in our basement, let's try to scale this and see what can happen. And so there was a town right next door to where we were living called Michigan City, an affordable working class, it was a industrial town. And so we thought, well, let's see, because there was also $1 million houses on the beach on Lake Michigan, but there was a ton of housing stock that needed to be fixed up and was very cheap. So I thought, let's try it with a property that could work well as a long-term rental and just see what happens as a short-term rental. And it just absolutely killed it. It was way better. It exceeded our expectations. We thought people are just going to come there for the beach. And we ended up getting bookings all year round. And we've got about, we had about 70% occupancy rate. And so we thought this is incredible. And so we just started scaling from there, slowly but surely. And now we've got 21 vacation rental listings.
Yeah. Awesome. That's what I really liked about you when I found you, as far as a short-term rental speaker and teacher, was that you don't teach that's a big problem, I think, in a lot of these groups that I'm in on Facebook. Is someone will come in, because I focus on creative finance. So I'll go in there and somebody will say, well, I've got this deal, but the financing's not that great, but they'll give me the deed. The rent rates on this house are $1,600 a month, but the payment's $19,000, and I don't know if it'll work. And everybody just jumps out and says, "Oh, just turn it into an Airbnb and you'll be fine." And I'm like, man, that seems really dangerous, because Airbnbs, I think, are great. They do produce a lot of income. We've stayed in them for the last year and a half, but there's a lot of volatility with that. In that, if people quit traveling for whatever reason, what if COVID comes back? What if communities just vote, city councils meet and just say no more Airbnbs? What do? You have the key, I think, with turning a property, like you just said, that will do long-term rental. Just use those as Airbnb. I mean, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah, exactly. That's been my thought too. And it hasn't, necessarily, it hadn't proved out until kind of recently. We were talking before this, there's this sort of hashtag going around Airbnb bust, because people are saying that Airbnbs are dying, and that occupancy rates way down. And you read the headlines, and of course media is going to latch on to individual examples and run with it. And I think that is true. I think that, since COVID, when all of a sudden people wanted to travel, be in more remote areas, all of a sudden, the price of cabins in the woods, in say Gatlinburg, Tennessee, they go up to $750,000, $1 million. And people are like, well, it still makes sense to buy that because it's going to cash flow several $1,000s a month. So I'm smart because I'm going to go buy this $750 or $1 million cabin in the woods, which maybe it can work for you. But now if things continue to go the way it looks like they're going, or in some cases are going, where you were depending on this 90% occupancy rate and it drops off a cliff because there's so many of them and people aren't traveling there as much anymore, and you don't have any utilitarian purpose for that property. People aren't traveling there to visit family or go to a wedding or funeral. They're only going there for a high-end vacation, and not a ton of people can afford this. So you have a select group that's going there for one reason, and if that reason goes away, now what? Now, do you turn it into a long-term, or does everyone sell them at the same time? Because what does that do to pricing then? So I just feel like people set themselves up or box themselves in this corner thinking, well, it's always going to be the way it is now, and have no backup plan. I just think that's a really scary situation to be in.
Yeah. I heard somebody say a long time ago, we were talking about what you can count on. And, the old joke is the only two things you can count on are death and taxes. But nowadays with what they're doing with technology, we don't even know if we'll always be able to count on death. But you can count on change. You can count on change, especially in real estate. It is cycles. And I've only been doing this 24 years, which is like a lifetime to some of these 19-year-olds that are flipping $100,000 profits on their properties. Man, they think it's always going to be that way. And I think the last 6 months have shown them, well, maybe not, because wholesalers ain't doing what wholesalers were doing 6 months ago.
Right.
It's really quieted down.
Exactly.
But things are, with the whole Airbnb thing, gosh, man, I know we're going to get into later your formula, but man, I was telling you earlier about one we're renting for our next Sub2 Max Mastermind in Branson. And this is a 12-bedroom, 8,000 square foot home that rents for $2,000 a night. Man, I can't imagine what it costs to furnish that thing. Just insane.
No kidding. Yeah. And those, like, I think they can have their place. Like, if you're already wealthy and you're comfortable with the downside risk, and you can potentially stomach the negative cash flow if that happens, or you're paying for it with cash. Hey, that may be great. It can be a place your family can use too. There's a lot of benefits, but for somebody just getting started to jump into that as their first deal, I just think there's a lot smarter way that you can start to build cash flow and get to financial freedom.
For sure. Okay, so let's talk about the smart way to do short-term rentals. Do you recommend someone getting started just work locally? I think you work in a couple of different markets, but do you recommend that they start local, or do you feel like a new person can venture out into new markets?
Yeah, so I kind of work through a process of identifying a market. And, like I said, I'm looking for the highest income to most affordable purchase price. And so where do you find that typically? You're not typically finding that in like California or on coastal regions. Typically that's, throughout the heartland of the US. It's the Midwest, it's the Southeast. That's where properties tend to be quote unquote on sale, where you can get the same property much cheaper than the rest of the US. But when you look at the income on those properties in terms of what they rent for on a nightly basis, it's really not that much below, or the percentage isn't as much below as the purchase price is. When you're comparing a property from like the coast to the Midwest. So you might buy a property in the Midwest for 1/10 of the cost, but the nightly rate isn't 1/10. It might be maybe half, but you're still, the ROI on that, the return compared to what you have into it, is substantially higher. So that's the place I start. And I start with places just outside of larger cities, within an hour drive. So you still have those draws, and still have local draws as well. So you can access the larger city, but you might have a water park there, or a beach, or a museum, or great restaurants or whatever. And so I think it can work whether you live down the street or whether it's across the country. You mentioned we're in a couple markets. What I recommend to people is to start with one market and build up a base of cash flow. So spend the time up front. Greg McCune talks about this in his book, Essentialism. He says, essentialism is this concept of like not doing a million things that don't, spreading yourself a mile wide and an inch deep. Instead, go deep on something. And so he says what essentialists do is they spend time up front really going deep on what's going to make the biggest impact. So for this, like spend time deciding on the right market before you jump in, and then go deep on that market instead of saying, I want to own one of these in every market across the US so I can travel there. Well, then you got to build a team in each one of these markets. They're not all going to perform well. Spend time picking the market and then go deep there. So that's what we did with Michigan City and built up a really great base of cash flow that allowed us to leave our full-time jobs and live off the income from our rentals. And then, long term, we wanted to own places warmer too, so that we're not in Indiana in January. And so we ventured out into Southwest Florida and are now buying duplexes down there. We're actually building 2 duplexes right now because the numbers make sense there as well. But we weren't spreading ourselves really thin, and so that's kind of like the first steps, I would say, to picking an ideal market.
Right. Okay. So once you pick your market, what is the best type of property that's going to produce that income that you're talking about in a ratio compared to what you pay?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that, again, is not intuitive. I was a little bit shocked about this when I first discovered it. But, we started with just a typical cookie cutter 3-bedroom, 1-bath ranch that's like a great little solid rental home. It needed rehab. We rehabbed it and it worked really well. And we were making about $1,000 to $1,500 a month in cash flow on that property. And so we were like, this is great. We, if we scale this, we get to 8 properties, I'll feel more than comfortable to leave my full-time job. And so that's what we did. But along the way, came across some duplexes and triplexes, and we realized, okay, I ran the numbers on these, and the nightly rate might be slightly lower. And even if the occupancy is lower, which typically it's about the same as a single family. But if the nightly rate is lower, you're still, once you look at the net cash flow, the cash flow is so much higher because your expense, you have such great economies of scale on expenses. So we can buy properties that are duplexes or triplexes that are still right around the same price of single family homes in our market. But now we've got 2 or 3 sources of income and one set of expenses. The taxes are, similar to a single family. And, we can make $4,000 or $5,000 of cash flow per month on a property that's an affordable triplex in our Midwestern market, which is like unheard of for a long. If I had to convert it to long-term rent, it would still flow, several hundred per unit.
Right. That's great. So let me ask you, when you move these as short-term rentals, do you also list them on the longer term, like corporate housing or nurses, that sort of thing, 30 days, or do you strictly do short-term rental?
So we've tested it out. In our market, Furnish Finders is like the big nurse midterm rental site that you can list it on. So we tested that. You have to pay for a subscription to that. And we did it for a year. And what we found was it really just the price point there compared to Airbnb, it just wasn't really compelling. And so, but at the same time that we were listed there, I think we did 1 booking through Furnish Finders. The rest were kind of like lowball offers to rent our place for 3 to 6 months. But at the same time, we were getting those 3 to 6 month bookings on Airbnb itself through nurses at a higher price from what we were listing it on Furnish Finders. So I think pricing, people underestimate how much of an art pricing is. There are so many different variables you can adjust with pricing, and every single day it changes because the inventory level and the supply and demand is different today than it will be tomorrow because we're a different length away from the high season and low season, and there's a different amount of inventory. So, so being able to tweak, long-term discounts, especially in your off season, to allow for those midterm bookings. We have several nurses that we're housing right now, because in January it's fantastic to have a 3-month booking that goes over January, February, March, because that might have been a 50% occupancy month. So if you can get 100% occupancy, even if it's at a discount, typically that's better revenue wise. But in the summer, then we have the flexibility to just do more of the short-term rentals, because it's mostly people traveling for vacation and that sort of thing.
Right. I was just curious about that because, my wife and I traveled for 18 months just doing Airbnbs all across the country. And one of our last stops was this place in Florida, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, pool, hot tub. I mean, it was just super nice. And it rented, and he had it on every site. Airbnb, VRBO, and then the long-term stuff too. So we got a house that was $350 a night on Airbnb and VRBO for $4,000 a month because we went long-term. So,
Nice.
it was a big discount, but he still made money. I mean, because, we got PropStream. We know what his loan was and what his payments were and everything. So he still made money, but, and he had it booked, not only in some of the seasons when it would have been fully booked anyway, but he had it booked all through the summer when it might have been a struggle, because Florida during the summer, it's not as, I guess, not as desirable because it's pretty hot down there.
Yeah, it's such a great strategy, like in the off season to tap into that. Even like you said, $4,000 a month, but his mortgage is probably less than that, so he's still cash flowing, and then he's going to make a ton of profit. In the opposite. So, and that's exactly what we did here in Costa Rica. We're staying at this place that has a private pool, tennis courts, like a soccer field, and it's this huge house. And we got it for $4,200 total for the whole month. And it's just kind of like unheard of, but we booked it far in advance, and he was offering these discounts. And so you can find these like needle in a haystack type deals.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'll tell you, we stayed in that house and we liked it so much. We started out, we were going to stay 3 months, and then we extended it 6, and then we asked to extend it another 3, and he said, "No, you got to get out. You're costing me too much money." It actually ran us off, but it was cool. It was a really nice place. So what's the best way to furnish these? And you find that the right house in the right place, you're going to make a bunch of money. Now you got to go out and buy all this furniture. So what's the best way to do that and affordably?
Yeah, the best way is to have a wife named Taryn, like I have, who can do it for you. But if you don't have that, what I recommend to people, because if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be touching furnishings. I think that's the worst part of this whole process, because it's time consuming and it's labor intensive, and I just wouldn't have the patience for it. But my wife absolutely loves it, and she's really talented at that aspect. So when I work with people on helping them set their first vacation rental, she's the one who teaches that whole portion. But if I was recommending to somebody getting started with it, what I say is reach out to home stagers in the area of the property. So, we're buying, like I said, we're building these 2 duplexes in Southwest Florida. Once they're done, my wife, she wants to go down there and set them up. But if I didn't have her, I would be reaching out to local home stagers in Southwest Florida and telling them I've got this Airbnb. And most of them now have experience. They've branched out into furnishing Airbnbs because it's just a natural extension of their home staging business. They've got all this furniture that they want to turn over consistently. It's used, but gently used. And they're willing to sell it for a discount. They've got people in place that set up the property, the furniture all day long and take it down. So it's just a perfect fit, as opposed to hiring a designer in some cases that can be pretty expensive. The home stagers can do it a lot cheaper and more efficiently. So they can handle that. And then, if you're not local, I would just recommend going in there at the end, or using, even through FaceTime. If you have somebody on the ground that's a handyman or a representative for you, they can do FaceTime walkthroughs and just make sure all the details are correct. But yeah, I think that's the best way to handle it.
Right. Okay. And what's your number? Let's say you just do a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, typical little ranch house that would be someone's home. You're converting it to an Airbnb. What would you expect to pay to furnish that house?
For us, it almost always works out to about 2,500 to 3,000 per room.
Mhm.
And so that's, we count bedrooms, living rooms, and kitchen into that. So if it's a 3 bedroom, 1 bath house with a living room and kitchen, you can multiply 2,500 times 5 there
Mhm.
because it's 5
Right.
separate rooms. And that covers everything from our
Mhm.
house automation, which we use, the Nest products for
Right.
the door locks and the doorbell cam and the thermostat, to dishes, to beds and linens and towels, and all of that is covered in that cost. And that's typically how we budget as we're
Right.
looking at properties. And that, that cost is based on us being smart about,
Mhm.
especially the bigger purchases like beds and stuff like that. We're not going to, crate and barrel to buy all of our furnishings. We're going
Mhm.
to go on marketplace and buy some secondhand stuff because there's some great stuff on there, especially for the expensive items. And then we have a sort of a checklist that we
Right.
order for every property. That's like the dishes, the
Mhm.
linens, all the stuff that we need for every property.
Right. Now, do you stick to just the basic stuff, just a basic house like you would move into, or do you try to give them a theme? Like if they're outside of St. Louis, it's, music or barbecue or
Yeah.
whatever, or do you just make it just a plain Jane?
So I think this was one of the hardest things for me to wrap my head around. And it's the hardest thing that I've noticed for people I work with who are previous real estate investors,
Mhm.
because traditionally in real estate investing, a 3 bedroom house is a 3 bedroom house. The rent rate is $1,000 in this town for a 3 bedroom house. And it doesn't matter if you have granite or you have fancy anything, you're getting $1,000. But with Airbnb, it's very different. You're paid exponentially more for creating a unique and desirable experience. So thinking through that, and my wife had to really beat that into my head when I was trying to be as cheap as possible and make it as basic as
Mhm.
possible and replicate the process. And she was the one that was saying, no, you need some unique features. You need to think
Right.
through what's going to make it Instagrammable for people,
Mhm.
what's going to set it apart. And so we do. We try. We don't have any. I wouldn't say theme. I mean, this triplex that we're finishing the rehab on now, we're calling it the Sunshine House because we painted it yellow, and then each one is going to have sort of like a forest theme, a beach theme, and then a sky theme. So it's
Mhm.
like a blue one, a green one, and uh, I guess a different color blue or something like that. My
Mhm.
wife is in charge of that.
Right.
But so they are going to be slightly different and have unique features. But like there's things like art. Like we created these canvas prints of the whole history of Michigan City
Mhm.
because we realized that it's a historic area, and a lot of our guests were saying they're coming here because they've heard about it in the past. They wanted to check it out and learn more about it. And we get so many comments on this because it's like these 3 huge canvas prints of the whole history going back to the early 1800s, and it's branded with our brand. And so
Mhm.
we do touches like that, and we leave like personal notes and gifts for our guests, and put in like unique furniture like chairs that hang from the ceiling and stuff like that um, just set it apart from your cookie cutter property. And I think that's the big advantage that mom and pop owners have over the
Mhm.
Vicasas of the world that are own thousands of these properties. They're just creating commodities. You're a number on a spreadsheet, and they don't care. They want heads and beds. But
Mhm.
if you're actually intentional and you think through it and think through what your guest likes, we have over 1,000 reviews at this point, and they're almost all 5 stars because people are like, "Wow, this was better than any Airbnb I've been to." And we're in a very working class area. We don't go like crazy, but we
Mhm.
do these things that are just a little bit more
Right.
intentional than the average.
I see. Okay. Now I want to ask you about something my wife found the other day, and she asked me about this. I said, I've never heard of this, but there was somebody posting in a group about, and I don't even remember exactly what they called it, but they are looking for people to partner with them. If you've got properties they want to furnish them and manage them in a partnership with you and do Airbnb stuff. And I know you probably know what that is. And what do you think about that? Is that a good idea or not? And why?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a couple different ways to set that up. Typically, it's referred to as the arbitrage, Airbnb arbitrage model, where either you're renting a house at the long-term rental rate and then you're turning it into a short-term rental and keeping the spread, or you're similar to what you just described, you're co-hosting it with someone where you're doing all the work, they own the property, and then you get either a percentage of the overall income or a fixed fee. And I think it can work. I mean, if you're just starting out, say you're just out of college, you don't have a whole lot of financing options maybe, and you have a ton of energy and hustle, and you want to get started making cash flow. It's a great way to jump into it and get your feet wet, because you can approach long-term rental owners and partner with them on that. What I would say is, I think people get into that thinking it's the same as buying short-term rentals. And I think that can be pretty short-sighted, because you're not buying an asset. So you're making this little spread, or it can be a big spread potentially, in there, but you're not getting any appreciation. You're not getting any of the principal pay down. You're not getting any of the tax benefits. You're not getting, there's just a ton of benefits that you get from owning property long-term. Because when I buy a property, I'm thinking, what's this going to be like 30 years from now? Because I'm not selling it. I'm just going to sit here and collect cash flow and let it pay for itself. But you don't get any of that. And so the owner could say, this has been great for a year. I'm going to go do this myself, or I'm pulling out, or whatever. And regulations, there's different regulations on it. So I think it was super popular for a while when it first started, when people first discovered that this could be the case. And most rental property owners weren't familiar with Airbnb and didn't want to do it themselves. I think it's becoming a bit more challenging these days, but it can still work. But I think it's just for like unique situations.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So we found the perfect property, and we've done the research on it. What's the typical financing on something like this? If you go out to buy a house specifically for Airbnb, what kind of financing are you going to be getting?
So I think a Sub2 deal would be the perfect financing.
I agree. And we've got students that are doing this. I mean, they're going out and taking over payments on 2.5% interest rate financing, long-term fixed, and turning them into Airbnbs. And that's great. I mean, that's maximum cash flow.
Yeah, exactly. When you were on my podcast, I was like, geez, I need to be marrying up these two strategies a little bit more, because what I've traditionally always done is the DSCR loan route. We have some Airbnbs on our personal residence. We live on a 45-acre farm, and we set up some Airbnbs there. So obviously that's like a conventional loan. But then once you get beyond that, and especially once you leave a W-2 job, your financing options are less. And so these DSCR loans, or asset-based loans that are still 30-year fixed loans, 75% down, sometimes you can marry those up with a private loan for the other 25%. So you can literally buy property for nothing down, especially when it's a really great deal and it cash flows well, because even with the combined payment to your private lender and the DSCR lender, you're still cash flowing really well in a lot of cases. And so that's been the route that we've traditionally used. But yeah, you can absolutely combine this with the Sub2 deal, and especially now with interest rates so high, finding people that locked in their rate 2 years ago and just taking over those payments. That's perfect.
Yeah. If you like that sort of thing, everybody knows me knows when you talk about landlording to me, and I'm like, get out the garlic and the crop. I mean, I'm just, and that's one reason we changed what we do. My first 12 years as an investor, I was a transaction engineer. I had rentals. I had Section 8 rentals. Airbnb wasn't a big thing back then. It's just really in the last, I guess, 10 or so since I stopped doing anything but seller financing. But I can see where if you can get financing on a house for 2.5% and then turn it into an Airbnb, how the cash flow can just be amazing. So we've got some students that really like it. I haven't taken the plunge yet, but as I'm getting older, because what I do is really just flipping stuff. It's a slow flip is what it is. I buy a house, I put an owner occupant in it. We get a down payment, we get monthly payments for a few years, and then they cash me out. I get another big payment, and they're on their way. I don't get those tax benefits. I don't get depreciation. I don't get equity buildup unless they give me the house back. So you got to start thinking about more of that as you're getting older. Because you're young now, so you don't know what I'm talking about. But when you're old, yeah.
Maybe that Branson owner will be bankrupt by the time you guys stay there, and you can put an offer in on that Airbnb.
I'm telling you, these guys, we had drone footage of this house, and the whole row that it's on is just full of these cookie cutter McMansions with 12 and 15 bedrooms. I mean, it's just like 20 of them all in a row. It's just crazy. It's right there on Lake Table Rock. It's beautiful. And everyone telling what that house cost. The house is new. They just finished it like in December of last year. It's only been 3 or 4 people stay there already, but it's pretty amazing. Yeah, I'm afraid after that video I saw today that there are going to be a lot of high-end houses fully furnished that people are going to be able to take over the payments on. That's sad. It is, but I think that's just the way we're heading. I don't know. So anyway. Okay, so Kirby, great information. I mean, I can see the way you do short-term rentals being the way to go. So tell us more about where people can find you, what you have to offer them, and how they can learn more about what you do.
Yeah, I just love real estate investing in general, and I always wanted to start a podcast, and so finally, several years ago, I started the Living Off Rentals podcast, and that community has kind of grown over time. So you can listen to any of those episodes. And William was on, it was a great episode. And so if you want to learn more from there, because people in the community were kind of asking me like, okay, so what's the next steps then? And so once I left my full-time job, I started a program where I help people who are working full-time to go from no passive income to finding, buying, and setting up their first sort of non-traditional high cash flowing vacation rental like we own. And so if you want more information about how that works or my process, livingoffrentals.com /start is the best place to go to. And I know that's up on the screen now. But there's a masterclass that I did about just a couple months ago that kind of walks through my process for buying these properties, and I'll give you a really good overview if you're interested in that.
Okay. And I know you got a couple of other things. You've got a YouTube channel as well, Living Off Rentals. And then, of course, you got a Facebook group that I just found today, and I just joined. So I'm looking forward to learning more about short-term rentals there. So, yeah, a lot of places to find you and learn. So great.
Yeah, it's all Living Off Rentals so it's easy to find.
Okay, awesome. Well, Kirby, thanks so much, man. I'm super happy that you joined us from your vacation in Costa Rica. That's
it's an honor to be here.
Short-term rentals, man, they must be doing well for you. So congratulations. So you go back and I guess have fun with the iguanas and whatnot, and we'll catch you a little later. Thanks for being here today.
Sounds good.
Okay, guys, that is it for this episode of the Sub2Deals Show. We appreciate you joining us today. If you want to learn more, then just go to our YouTube channel, which is sub2tv.com. And you can also check out $7coaching.com. That is the least expensive, most affordable creative finance coaching on the planet. I guarantee it. And if you find anything less expensive, let me know so I can join that group. So we can catch you guys next time. So get out there, talk to some sellers, and buy some houses.